Good morning, Colorado Springs. I'm Angela Jones, and it's another brighter day in the neighborhood. We welcome you, and today, Florian de Castro back to our studio. Hi, Flo.
Hello, Angela. It's great to be here again.
I know. I'm like, actually, after we talked the last time, I noticed like there were so many people that you were plugged in with, and so excited to see you on the show. We just had a lot of activity on that podcast.
Yes.
I think it was in no small part about just the interesting topics we were talking about.
It was. I mean, a lot of people it's like wondering about this Asian Heritage Center. What's going on with
Right.
that. But we also talk a little bit about the technology, right? And
Right.
just to be geeking out here.
Right.
Since I'm a big geek.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of potential there, especially where we're talking about NFTs and Metaverse is big news right now, and more
Right.
than likely it'll keep going on and on. Virtual reality. What's going to
So
happen?
is that tied in with the Asian Cultural Center, or is this just like these are things that you are also interested in?
Actually, it is tied to it. It's also partly with the media company and the
Okay.
radio stations because a lot of people are okay. What can you use this NFTs for?
Right.
And right now, the big thing is used for is digital art, right?
Okay.
So there's things like I think a picture with a cat that was sold for $500,000, some crazy ungodly amount. Well, I'm also looking at NFTs to use for media. So, like for example, your show.
Okay.
How do you maintain content control or the authenticity or the ownership of your show? Well, how about if we made that with an NFT? So now if anybody wants to go use any portion of your show, they would have to like buy rights
Right.
for that.
You know, it's interesting that you would mention that. So, you and I kind of talked about that, not too long ago, we were down in Miami for the Wadapalooza.
Oh yeah.
We're part of that. And there was an NFT conference that abutted that. And so my husband and I went and spent 3 days. It was the North American Bitcoin Conference. And, I don't know a lot about that. I certainly can't give any legal advice about any of these types of things. I'll just say that right now. But my husband and my adult sons, have all been talking about NFT and blockchain and cryptocurrencies and different kind of things like that. And of course, they come to me asking these questions because of my legal background and also saying, hey, we should get invested in this or that or the other thing. And I'm not going to invest in anything that I don't know. You want to talk about geeking out. Now,
Yeah.
I'm going to learn as much as I can about anything. I mean, I can hardly go to, a restaurant without, figuring out what all the ingredients they use and whatnot. Where's this sourced? I'm that girl. So, but we spent 3 days listening to, industry experts talk about the ins and outs and NFTs and blockchain and cryptocurrencies and, going and, just creating this new environment that's accessible, but that's also outside of, any government's ability to devalue its own currency, to make international transactions not only more fluid, but in a way, some people think less transparent, but more transparent because there's a record of everything and there's multiple records. So it's very difficult to hide it. But on the NFT topic explicitly, there was just a lot of confusion as to what this is or what this isn't, and it being kind of a fad or, celebrities getting out here, offering things or bidding on things, sort of virtue signaling or, engaging in elitism and it not making any sense. And I came away with this real sense of opportunity there. Because, I mean, on the surface, so one of my very first jobs when I was I went from high school and had a couple part-time jobs, but I had this little job in Germany when I was finishing up school when my oldest son, who's 30 now, was just a baby. It was called American Comics and Collectibles.
Yes.
And so it was baseball cards and it was little figurines and, even Playboys from like the 60s. This guy was selling
Collectibles, yeah.
And he was a former BMW salesperson. And I was just asking him, how did you get into this? He was like, it's like we used to say in car sales, there's a tail for every seat, you know? So what people want to collect just is very varied. Some people it's antiques, some people it's ball cards, some people it's sports memorabilia. And with NFTs, that's art in and of itself. It's digital art, but what's super interesting about it is the way that it's transferred. There is a trail of ownership. And not only that, you can attach to the back of it, for lack of a better way of describing, attach to that NFT access to things or ownership of other things.
Right.
Like you and I were talking a little bit earlier about there's been some real estate transferred or sold essentially through NFTs in Florida. And the way that they did that was there was this NFT, which is this non-fungible token, digital piece of art that people bid on. But what they got in addition to that were ownership of an LLC that owned a piece of real property in Florida. And I think there's at least 2 that have gone for sale that way. Both real properties have gone at a premium, probably in part because there's a bit of a novelty. But that type of like smart contracts access to is very much a part, I think, of the opportunity that's there. And the other thing, and I think this ties into kind of what you're talking about in terms of property rights, you know, there may come a time where like right now, music is uncontrolled.
Right.
You
Well,
know,
partially, yeah.
to a large extent.
Especially
you know?
on the artist side. They lose control, actually.
Well, that's the idea. And that was the whole idea that they were talking about at the Bitcoin conference is to not that brokers or the middleman or producers or whatever should be cut out, but that it makes a lot more sense to reward artists.
Yes.
You know, and that actually keeps prices down for consumers as well. When you can bring the people who want to enjoy art or whatever product, when you can cut out all the additional costs that come with distribution or the middleman, then it creates, you know, abundance, really. You know, it encourages more artists to get into that field, which, you know, is more supply, which means there's more for people to, you know, enjoy.
And that's really the entire issue or concern with NFTs and blockchain, because a lot of people keeps using different terms,
Right.
or they're thinking it's a different term and really it isn't. So the overall underlying technology is blockchain.
So, and the
right.
NFTs are on it.
Yes,
They're
yes.
sitting on the blockchain, just like
Cryptocurrency,
cryptocurrencies
yep,
sit on
exactly.
the blockchain.
Right. But most
Right.
people didn't hear about that because they only heard, oh, this is cryptocurrency and blah, blah, blah. And they didn't really understood the technology
Right.
associated with that. But now we're finding multiple and different applications for NFTs. You know, the digital art, right? For example, what prevents, or how can you tell that digital art is actually yours or is the original or is authentic? You can't, right? In the past, because
Right.
you could download a picture, screenshot it, whatever the case may be, and
Right.
say, this is mine, right?
Right.
So that's what the blockchain will allow people now, is to develop digital art and say, this is really mine. You want it, you have to go pay for it, just like everything else. And if someone is planning on selling it, you should be asking for the NFT for that, because then that says it's authentic, that actually belongs to somebody. Biggest thing right now in the news, of course, is Metaverse and virtual land and all these other different
Now
things that's going
an
on.
area that I think is weird. I mean, and I'm not going to lie, I think it's super weird. So you tell me how this isn't weird.
So it's analogous to website domain.
Okay.
So if you want a briardaylaw.com, right, you have to go buy that domain.
Correct.
And that prevents someone else from doing that. Think of it in that relationship, in that, you know, most people think, oh, well, it's virtual, so there should be, you know, infinity amount of it. Actually, there isn't. Just like everything else, there's a finite space. Most people say, well, okay, real land, right? Most people say, well, real land, there's a finite amount of the land.
Right.
Yes and no.
Unless you go to Mars.
Well, I mean, other planets, right? And we can discuss that in a different topic, because, you know, that's one of my other plans, you know, to go beyond the Earth.
I did not know that.
Yeah. I mean, I got a place picked out in Utopia Planitia. It's an actual place in Mars, and you know,
Oh, wow.
I'd like
Okay.
to build a retirement home there, maybe, you know.
Nice.
But Be that as it may. So think of it as like the domains where you can actually buy things. Like for example, I think Beyonce, when her child was born, she actually bought the domain name for that child, because now someone could buy that and she would have to pay hundreds of thousands down the line, or their child would have. So think of it that way. And then so really now there's two or three main companies that do virtual land there. One of them is I believe it's Sandbox is the main one right now.
Right.
Snoop Dogg bought a property there, and
Sandbox,
then everybody was buying properties around Snoop Dogg's, because then it's very potentially very lucrative, because before they can get to Snoop Dogg's property, they'd have to pass through their virtual space.
Right.
I think one of the neighbors around Snoop Dogg, someone paid like $500,000
Wow.
for that just virtual space.
Wow.
So a lot of people are like, okay, what is this all about? Why is this so important? It's the very early part of the internet where the domain names, people actually bought out domain names back then, and then like you would have to go buy that. If I want that domain name, you have to go buy it.
Right.
So those are the kind of things that are coming up. Now the question now is, okay, how solid are all of this? I would want to say maybe 90 to 95% of this will go away. Just like if you look at, if you remember the very
.com.
beginning of the .com, a lot of that stuff went away. But that there was still opportunity there, because people made a ton of money when internet was just in its beginning.
Amazon. Well, what was MySpace, but eventually, like Amazon, Facebook.
Well, even Yahoo, right?
Yeah, Yahoo. PayPal got its start way back with eBay. All of those got their start during the .com era.
Yep.
And so, there are players that are going, it's going to stick and you're going to stay. So the question becomes, especially when you're talking about, and, cryptocurrencies, are you going to go all in on, or should you spread it? Should, do some Bitcoin, do Ethereum, do some of the, what they would call bleep coins, like with Dogecoin and some of those other, lower tier things. And I encourage my sons, I'm like, get the Dogecoin, get all the Shibu, whatever. I mean, because the ROI is humongous if it goes anywhere, and they're completely priced out now of anything like Bitcoin with the Ethereum and some of its other counterparts sort of in the middle,
and they're still affordable. I mean,
Correct.
Bitcoin is like what, 45,000 per coin.
I mean, but it's kind of okay, it's like any other kind of stock. Like if people would say, they look back, oh, if only I knew, that AT&T would be, or if only I knew that Facebook would be, or whatever. And I think that's where you have to get in there and kind of, have a certain spirit of adventure. Obviously, don't, commit any money or spend any money on something you can't afford to lose, like with any other investment. But, it's a real fertile ground for opportunity.
And it is. And actually, my there was a time where my stance on cryptocurrency was like, yeah, I'm not going to invest in that.
Yeah.
And then largely I still don't, even though I am in it.
Right.
But I use it for a different function. I use it more as a inflation hedge.
Huh.
So instead of putting my money into a savings account, I actually put it in cryptocurrency and use it as a bank.
Well, let's come back to that in just a second. I want to check in with our listeners and remind you're listening to A Brighter Day in the Neighborhood with your host, Angela Jones, sponsored by Brighter Day Law. And our guest today is Flo de Castro. All right. So let's talk about that, because I think a lot of people right now are very concerned about inflation.
Yes.
And, I think I read somewhere like in January, inflation across the board was something at 7%, was like the highest inflationary increase since the 1970s in the United States. And I was born in very late 60s, 69. But I can remember being, sitting in line to get gas,
Right.
and it was so, I think the deal was, it was something like, if your license plate was odd or even, then you could,
Fill up.
Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Wednesday, and Sundays, it was either a free for all or closed. I can't recall exactly which. But my dad, being out there smoking a cigarette at the gas pump, you know what I mean? Us, of course, hopping around in the back seat of the car, no car seats, no seat belts or anything like that. And, and him complaining about how gas, which it was under $1, but it was nearing, it was creeping up there. And that might have been more like, late 70s, early 80s at this point in time. But it was, he just couldn't believe the prices.
Right.
And I'm hearing, obviously, at about 4 times level, it's like we've gone from having gas that's in the 2s to having gas that's almost in the 4s here in Colorado Springs in the last 6 months. So,
and it actually is going to get worse. I mean, the projection I'm looking at is gas would maybe going to $10 per gallon.
Get out.
In the next 2 years here.
No way.
Partly because of all the different administrative stuff, efforts, administration, and they're pushed to go EV, electric vehicles. Yeah. And so, but.
Well, and I lived in Europe, and gas there. I don't know that it exactly equates to $10 per gallon, but I will say it is much, much more expensive than it is in the United States.
A lot more. I mean, when we lived there from 2012 to 2015, I was probably $4 to $5 per liter, which of course translate 3 liters roughly is a gallon.
Right.
So think about that.
It's expensive.
They were already there.
So, but the difference between Europe and the United States, though, with respect to our fuel, a need for fuel or what have you, is like Germany sits inside Texas.
Sure.
And Germany is the largest country in all of Europe. So, when we start to, and it has a very well developed infrastructure
transportation
in terms
system.
of mass transit. We have a few cities that have decent mass transit.
Right.
I can't even think of one that has truly great mass transit.
Correct.
No dig on any city.
Sure.
But in comparison to what is readily available in all over Europe, it's save Italy maybe. So it's just there's just a dramatic difference. And so we as Americans, I like to kind of quip that we're born with wheels on our feet. We have to have a car. If you look at most even major metropolitan areas, most places it's not very walkable.
No.
We can't get around in that same way. And so the impact of having $10 per gallon gas in Europe versus having $10 per gallon gas in the United States is dramatic, to say the least.
It is, and it's going to affect a lot of the people that depend on their transportation and don't have the transportation system for that. So, going back to inflation and everything, one of the reasons why I'm starting to use cryptocurrency as my savings account is because I'm seeing those. And then the inflation rate that they're actually talking about is misleading. It's actually double digits.
Wow.
Especially if you actually account for all the different things that's going on. But they're still largely saying, it's below 10. It's like, no, it's actually higher than 10.
So what goes into that equation that you think is being left out?
Well, part of it is because if you start saying inflation is that high, then you have a panic.
No, I got that. But I'm just saying, what factors do you think are being left out? Or do you think it's just a fabrication?
No. Actually, it's a cycle.
Okay.
So our economy actually goes into this boom and bust cycle.
Of course.
So we've been in a boom for
a long time.
A long time, over a decade now.
Well, and it's also been somewhat, we had that recovery from 2000, the drop in 2007, then we,
08,
all the way
09.
through 9.
Yep.
And I wouldn't say we came out of that. I don't know. It was probably 7 or 8 years ago that we started to get on the mend. And I would definitely say it was more of a bull market than a bear.
Yeah.
But, in terms of actual boom, I think it's been the past 2.5 or so years.
It has. And so there's a cycle that goes on. Actually, I'll shout out to Ray Dalio. He has a YouTube video called How the Economy Works that actually explains this really well.
And what's that name in case anyone wants to check that out?
It's Ray Dalio and How the Dalio, so Dahlio.
Okay.
He's actually the founder of one of the largest hedge fund in the world. So he actually explains there's a short-term and long-term debt cycle. Short-term debt cycle is roughly 8 to 12 years, give or take. Long-term debt cycle is like 90 to 100 years.
And you're talking about from the Fed standpoint.
Well, from the spending, the credit, and everything else, right?
By the government
By
or
the
by
gov-
consumers?
By the government.
By the government. Okay.
So think about that. It's like 40% of our monetary has been existed the last 2 years alone. Sorry, not 60%, 40%. 40% of our monetary
our currency
was
printed in the last 2
in the
years.
last 2 years.
Yeah.
So think about that. That's a lot. That's inflation.
Well, that causes it's a supply and demand thing.
It is. It
causes the more cash that's in the economy, the less valuable each bit of it is. And what's happening right now is because there's been this flood of money in the economy, people have additional money to spend, especially, and it really is, it's not the people at the bottom who this extra cash was meant to help per se, but it's people in, the upper tiers who own lots of assets, who are getting more money for their assets, end up with extra money. Like if they own real estate, this real estate boom, you run up, these doubling the, amount of money you can, get for a property that you purchase, this equity. But then you've got this money. Let's say I sell my property, then I've got all this money. I want to deploy it somewhere. Well, then I'm putting it into maybe a more valuable asset, but I have extra cash, and so does this guy and that guy and this guy. So that's where these bidding wars come from that drive prices up and up and up. That's inflation. It's the same. And then we've got the COVID that contributed to it with supply chain issues. So you've got that shrunken demand. Shrunken supply for ordinary demand, which also increases prices. So you've got almost this perfect storm that's led us to this place.
It is.
And then the government, from what I understand, has done some, taken some easing measures. Taken some easing measures that eventually it's kind of like, it's like hiding checks. Eventually the bill's got to be paid. It's got to be cashed.
Well, we have all this debt now, right?
Yeah.
If you look at it, some of us are looking at it and looking at the economy and saying, ooh, if you compare 1937 depression, pre-1937 depression, we are pretty similar to where we're at back then. And a lot of people may not remember this, but Japan in the 80s, 90s, they actually they still do have high inflation, to the point that most people. I was there like in 2019, and you have to a Happy Meal would cost you 1,000+ yen for a happy a combo meal.
Sure.
Most people wouldn't think paying $1,000 1,000 yen or $1,000 equivalent for a Happy Meal. But think about this now. I remember when the Happy Meal was $5. Now really it's $10 to $11 to $12 for a Happy Meal.
Yeah.
So that's the inflation piece right now. So now the question is, Japan actually went negative in some points. So now, if you have a negative interest rate, now your savings account, you have to pay the bank money to keep your money in a savings account. So that's why I've been taking my money out of the bank accounts, because that could happen. That could happen to the U.S. here in the next 10 years.
Right.
So now, where else are you going to put your money? Well, most people say, "Oh, let's put it in silver and gold," and it's like, well, how are you going to get that out? You're going to buy a silver or gold bullion. Okay, now you still have to trade that, and for money, and then the exchange rate is the exchange rate.
And some people are saying that's it's good though, because money becomes less, like you trade X amount of money now. In the future, you're going to get more and more and more money. Kind of like it's going to keep pace with inflation, I think, is the idea behind that. But
and then that's why a lot of people are switching to cryptocurrency, right? Because so like Bitcoin, there's a limited amount of Bitcoin. Actually, I think in the next 4 or 5 years, there will no longer be any new Bitcoin to be mined. They've ran out. So then the only way you can actually get Bitcoin is
to buy it.
to someone to sell it, and then you can buy it. So now that price is going to increase and increase. So really, there's you now don't look at cryptocurrency as a thing to invest in. Look at cryptocurrency to help stave off inflation.
Right.
Stave off the loss of value of your dollar.
All right, so Flo, we've come to the end of our time, and I've got to have you back because we have to pick up this conversation where we left off seriously because, just because I'm interested, to be quite frank with you, and I have so many more things to say about this or for us to explore about this. So, I hate to put that burden on your time, but let's look at your calendar when we get done here today, okay?
It's always a good time being here, Angela.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us for another Brighter Day in the Neighborhood. You can join us here again at the same time and station each week. And until next time, have a brighter day.